Typically, the entry point for AEM is the Site Manager, but the Asset Manager is where you will keep your image and document files for your website. So to get to the Asset Manager, you'll need to use the navigation overlay, which is accessed via the top left Adobe Experience Manager logo. Click on the logo to open the navigation overlay and click Assets and then Files to switch to the Asset Manager. The process is in reverse to get back to the Site Manager. You should see the standard content tree in the left pane. If you're not seeing that tree, it could be collapsed or showing a different menu item. So click on the View pane drop-down below the AEM logo and click on Content Tree. And if you're not seeing in the right pane a list view, maybe it's showing a tile view, for example, then click on the right pane view drop-down and select List View there. These two pane views provide the best view of your asset folder structure, the content, as well as the status of your files. Navigate to your folder, and it's recommended to bookmark the location in your browser. If you bookmark both the Site Manager and the Asset Manager windows, then you can directly open both in two separate browser windows and not worry about having to navigate back and forth. This makes your workflows faster. Units are generally issued a main asset folder containing an images and a documents folder, but authors are free to add to or change the content structure within their own main asset folder. However, the main asset folder should remain unchanged, as the naming and location of these folders are managed specifically by the CC Web team. The left pane content tree shows the full folder and file contents of the system. When a folder in the left tree is selected and expanded, it will show the files and folders in that folder in the tree and in the right pane. However, you cannot directly select individual files in the left tree. And for folders, there are limited management options. To manage files and folders fully, you will need to select them in the right pane. Then you will see all possible menu items related to the selected content. The right pane provides the best overview of the status of your assets and folders. The first two columns are the name and title columns. The name column is the file name used for the URL path. This file name should follow URL formatting and be lowercase, use dashes, not underscores for word separators, and have no spaces or special characters. The title is the folder title or file title. For images that have been uploaded without a proper title, sometimes you will see a placeholder of the file type there, but to be found in the page editor's side panel or in component dialogues, you will need to have a proper title added for those. Those can be done in the Properties menu item, which will be covered later in the video. If a title exists in the metadata of a file when it is uploaded to AEM, it will be imported to the AEM file metadata and shown in the properties along with any copyright information embedded in the image or document. The type column displays the file type of an asset and is followed by the dimensions applicable to image files only, and then the size column, which displays the file size. The modified and published columns are the most important for knowing the status of your folders and assets. Folders and assets not published will display not published in the published column. This is generally the initial state when you first create a folder or you've dragged in and added an asset. If published, you will see the world icon with a green publication date, and unpublished or deactivated folders or files will display with a line through the world icon next to a date in red. If a folder or an asset has been modified in some way, for example, the title's changed or a file name or even a CUG has been set on a folder that has not been republished, then it will display with an exclamation icon next to the date in blue in the modified column. Folders or assets in this state will need to be republished in order to realize the changes on the published side. Typically, the order of files or images in an asset folder is not critical unless, of course, you wish to display assets of a folder in a link list component using the child pages functionality for download purposes on a web page. In this case, the order of the assets may be important. Like the Site Manager, on the far right of each row in the right pane, there's a double row of dots. These can be used to drag and drop and reorder assets and even folders in the right pane as needed. Like the Site Manager, the black bar with the user profile preferences is also available in the Asset Manager if you need to change your language preference. Since it is all one system, regardless of the management window you're in, the language preferences that are set as a whole and apply to the Asset Manager, the Site Manager, as well as the Page Editor view. Depending on a selection, whether only a folder in the left tree or whether items are selected in the right pane, the menu items displayed in the Asset Manager will differ. They can also differ depending on the status of a file. For example, you will never see the delete menu item unless a file or folder has been manually unpublished first. You will also see some menu items that are non-functional in our system, and we strongly suggest not using them because they can create workflow conflicts. I will go over the basic functionality in the Asset Manager and highlight these points as I go along. If only a folder is highlighted in the left content tree, then the menu options are limited in the panel view in the left content tree drop-down and the Create menu drop-down on the far right. With the folder selected in the left tree, the Create menu drop-down on the right contains folders and file menu options, where you can create folders and upload files. You will also see these in the Create menu drop-down on the left if a folder is selected in the right pane. To select an item in the right pane, you will need to click on the thumbnail to the left of the folder name, for example. A selected item will always appear with a darker blue highlight and with a check mark. Whichever way is used, when a folder is selected, the newly created folders or uploaded assets will be added to that one. You will also notice that when an item, whether it's a folder or an asset, is selected in the right pane, relevant menu items will appear across the top of the Asset Manager. To add a new folder, select Folder from the Create menu drop-down. You will be prompted to enter a title for the new folder in the title field, and you'll notice that the system will automatically begin creating a URL name for the folder in the lower name field as you're adding the title. You can choose to keep it if the title is short, but it's recommended to adjust it to a shorter 2-word name if the title is lengthy. The naming should always follow URL formatting and be lowercase, no spaces or special characters, and use dashes for word separators. This requirement is needed because file or folder names are part of the URL path to the asset, and using dashes for separators will retain the separation of words, making them more search engine friendly and understandable. If the orderable field is not checked, it is best to mark this to be able to reorder folders and assets in the folders. If forgotten at any time, then you can always do this at a later time in the properties of a folder. Click Create to create the folder, and then you will see the new folder in the right pane and also in the content tree in the left pane. There are a few ways to upload files in an empty folder. You can either click in the center of the right pane and select the files from the Finder window that pops up, or for folders that already contain files, then you can click on the files in the Create drop-down, which will also initiate the Finder window to allow the selection of files from your computer. However, the easiest way, in any case, is to just simply drag and drop files from your computer directly to the right pane. Only files can be added, not folders or zip files of folders. In general, image files should never exceed 1.5 megabytes to avoid performance issues, or documents and download files should never exceed 50 megabytes, or they could result in a server or browser timeout, and then it would be unavailable for users on the front end. Videos should also never be added to the Asset Manager. AEM has YouTube, Vimeo, and ETH Matterhorn repository video components for displaying on websites. All files added in the Asset Manager will be uploaded in the unpublished state. So for files to be available on the front end of your website, you will need to publish all folders and files, since the folders are also part of the URL path for the asset. AEM should not be used for general file storage. Only files that are used for the enhancement of websites should be uploaded in the Asset Manager. Please be aware that the automatic removal of unreferenced files of a predetermined age from the system might be considered in the future to keep the system clean and keep the back-end performance at its best due to the sheer number of websites and assets housed in our system. If a file or folder is selected in the right pane, the next menu item is the Download menu. We highly recommend clearing out assets that are no longer referenced on your web pages. The Download menu option for a folder is a good way to make sure you have copies of all the assets you had used for your website before clearing out your folders. The Download menu option will open a dialog offering to save as a zip file, and offers the option to create a single zip file or a zip file for each asset individually. The email field should be ignored, as this is not an option due to restrictions on file sizes by mail servers. There are assets and renditions fields, but by default, assets is marked and will indicate how many files and the total size of the files to be downloaded. Renditions is typically never needed by authors, as renditions are system-created images and only used in the backend. Click on Download, and the zip file will be saved to your computer's download folder. The same process applies for a single file or multiple selection of individual files in the right pane. The Properties menu item has slightly different options or purposes depending on whether a file or a folder is selected. Depending on which is selected, there can be many options in the Properties overlay, but only a few will apply in our system and also be useful for authors. With a folder selected, the first field is the folder title. This field can be used if a folder title needs adjusting, or if a file is selected, it can be used to either adjust or add a title for the file. If a file has been created with metadata such as copyright and title information in an external application, then it will automatically be imported into the system, into the properties when uploaded. However, if a file does not have a title, then the system might show just basic file format in the Asset Manager title column. But in order to make the asset visible in the side panel of the page editor and in configuration dialogues of components, and to also be used in lists created with the linked list component using the child page configuration, you will need to add a title for the file. If you find you're unable to reorder folders or assets in a folder, then be sure the orderable checkbox is marked under the title field of a folder. This will allow the drag and drop functionality in the right pane of the Asset Manager shown earlier in the video. The Smart Tag functionality is not yet developed in our system, and none of the profile tabs are really relevant. However, the Permissions tab allows an author to set a closed user group on a folder such that any files referenced from the folder on a web page will require a valid user login to download the file. This feature can only be applied to folders and not individual files. In the configuration, there is an option for admitting all users with an ETH user account, or one can configure a custom group, which could be an existing unit Lysol or a DRX group created by someone in the IM Web Center tool and configured for export to Active Directory and LDAPs. Be aware that once a CUG is set on a folder, then that folder will only be visible in the backend by authors that are members of the CUG group as well as the author who set the configuration, even if that author is not a member of that CUG group. With an asset selected, many properties in the various tabs will not be needed by authors in our system. However, the licensing information in the advanced tabs, such as creator, copyright, copyright owner, and usage terms, might be important. And as mentioned earlier, if the files were created in applications with this information embedded, then it will be automatically imported. The scheduled activation, deactivation in the properties and also in the Manage Publication menu area of the Asset Manager should not be used for assets or folders in the system. This feature can cause workflow issues if in conflict with the activation and deactivation of pages containing or linking to those assets. Feature. The last tab is a repeat of the References menu item in the content tree dropdown, showing the pages that the selected asset is referenced on, and also provides a link to that page, and it will open it in the page editor view if you need to edit. If anything else is adjusted or configured in the properties of a folder or a file, you will need to reactivate or republish it again to make the changes realized in the system. The next menu item is the Copy menu item. This is rarely, if ever, used for the Asset Manager. It will copy a folder and its contents or a file, but this functionality should not be used to reorder existing folder content or files, since the copy-paste functionality will not retain the path information if an asset is already referenced on a web page. For the relocation of asset folders or assets already in use, the Move menu item should always be utilized because it will update all references automatically in the system. The Copy menu item is also not recommended to pre-make folders in a section because it requires much more work to change the title and the path name of each folder afterwards. It's much faster to use the Create menu option from the start for each new folder. A single copy of a file is only needed in the system, and thus there's no need for multiple copies. Please note that authors are not allowed to copy assets from any other folders in the system. Although all assets are visible to all authors in the system, copyright rules should be adhered to by all authors. With the assumption that all authors are uploading assets in the Asset Manager and are abiding by copyright regulations and have the permission to use the files they upload for their own websites, it is important for all authors to know that all assets in a unit's folder belong to that unit only and can only be used by another unit if express permission has been granted, in which case there is never a need to copy anything, but instead should be referenced from the original source folder. The Move menu option has two main purposes: to rename the name, or rather the URL of a folder or a file, and or to actually move a folder or a file to another location in your asset folder structure or to another if you have access to more than one. Clicking on the Move menu item will open an overlay, and the first field is where you can change the title of the folder or file while being moved or changing the path name. This title field can be used to change the title of a folder or asset only if you are going to either rename it or move it, but it cannot be used only to change the title. To change the title, only the title field in the Properties menu must be used. The second field shows the current path name URL of the folder or asset. When changing a path name, it does need to follow proper URL formatting and should be concise, lowercase, have no spaces or special characters, and use dashes as word separators. Click on Next to display the destination overlay, and if moving the folder or asset, then navigate to the new parent folder. Or if it's to remain where it is, select the current parent folder by clicking on its thumbnail on the left. A folder is selected only if it is highlighted, showing darker blue with a checkbox. Once the destination folder is selected, the Move menu item in the upper right will become active. Click on that, and then you'll be returned to the Asset Manager and see that your changes have been reflected. You will need to republish the folder and/or assets to make changes realized. If a path change has been made to a folder, then all web pages referencing assets in that folder will also be updated automatically. And if they are already published or in the modified state, those pages will republish automatically by the system to make the changes on the front end to users. However, if the page is not published or is deactivated, it will only stay as a modified state in the back end, with the references updated but not republished. The Edit menu item will open the asset in an overlay and provide editing options that you see similar to what is in component dialogues, with cropping and other options, but we recommend never using this menu item in the Asset Manager since it affects all instances of the asset and can cause conflicts when also editing the assets within component dialogues with their own image requirements. The next menu item is Annotate, which is currently non-functioning in our system. The Quick Publish menu item is used to publish one or more folders or assets immediately. When used for folders, however, it will not publish the content of a folder, but only the folder itself. To publish a folder or an asset, click on the thumbnail to the left of the name column and then click on the Quick Publish menu item, and your folder or asset will be published. The Manage Publication menu item for folders or assets is generally used for the deactivation of folders and its files, or one or more files selected in the right pane. The Publish and Unpublish Later functionality of the Manage Publication menu item should not be used for assets or folders. Instead, this should only be used in the Site Manager for web pages. Unpublishing a folder will unpublish all files contained in the folder, since the unpublish functionality in the system is an inherited feature to all its children. Before unpublishing folders or assets, it is important to check if the files are referenced on web pages in the system. Otherwise, it can result in broken links or missing images on web pages. To check the references of an asset, click on the asset thumbnail to the left of the file name, and then from the Content Tree drop-down on the left, select References. If you see a number noted under the site references, the file is being used on web pages in the system. Clicking on that element will then display all the pages the asset is used on, and if you have access to those pages, you can click on the page and the Edit button, and it will open the page in the page editor, and you can remove or change a link or image as needed. If you're not the editor of a page, then you can still click on this and see the last editor of the page by looking at the published modified information at the top of the page editor. Then that editor could be notified to inform them of an impending change that affects their page. The Version menu item can be seen in the Content Tree drop-down. If a file is selected in the right pane, this will probably be a menu item that's very rarely used, since a version of an asset or a web page in the system is created automatically when it's published. There's a limit to the number of versions available in the system. Typically, the limit is about 10, and the system will remove older versions older than 90 days, unless they are the only version, and once a page or an asset is again updated in any way, the older version will disappear. The Version menu item can be used to manually create a version of an asset before making changes to one, for example, if there's only an older one in existence. This will allow for the reversion back to the prior version if needed. To create a version, select a file by clicking on the thumbnail such that it's highlighted in blue with a check mark. Click on Version from the drop-down and you'll be prompted to enter a label name for your version. You can also add a comment in the comment field to further identify the version if needed, and then click Create. Once completed, you will then see the timeline in the left panel instead of the content tree. This is also a menu item in the Content Tree drop-down and shows you the full history of a selected asset. And so you will see the latest entry at the top, being the newly created version here. Later, if you need a version or want to see any other version that was created, you can click on one in the timeline view, and it will give you the option to revert to that version or just view a preview of it. The history of the asset is complete in this timeline view. However, the display limits the number of items initially seen, and so to see older history, you may need to click on the More menu button at the top, and it will keep loading any older timeline events if they exist. To get the content tree back in the left pane, click on Content Tree from the drop-down above the left panel. You will not see the Delete menu item for a selected folder or asset unless it has first been unpublished. The asset or folder can be unpublished using the Manage Publication menu item as described earlier in the video. Once references have been checked and the folder or asset has been unpublished, once selected, you will see the Delete menu item. If you select this, this will remove the folder or asset permanently from the system. You can distinguish initially unpublished state items from manually unpublished items in the Asset Manager because the initial state just notes not published in the published column, whereas a manually unpublished item will appear with a red date in the published column. If you're not seeing all of the menu items we've covered so far in this video in the menu bar, then it could be that your browser window is narrow or you're viewing it on a smaller device, in which case some of the menu items might be hidden in a drop-down, which is found by clicking on the 3 dots on the far end of the menu bar.